Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair and to our 4th anniversary. Yeah, I know that I already did a milestone episode recently with the 100th episode, so I'm not gonna do the whole gushing about how I'm so shocked and happy that you're still watching me after 4 years, or how grateful I am because of it, since I already said that fairly recently, and you guys don't need to hear me say that more than once a year. Anyway, since it doesn't look like we're gonna get attacked by any extra-dimensional villains today, let's talk about the book we're going to review, which is...
Shada!
Thanks, Tom. Yes, Shada, the lost Fourth Doctor story that was eventually novelized 33 years later. And this is kind of a funny coincidence. The book is almost as old as this show, as it was released on March 15th, 2012, a week after this show's first episode released on March 8th, 2012. Couldn't have picked a better book to do for this anniversary, I guess. Anyway, we've got a lot to cover, and there is a lot of backstory as well. But since I can already see that this episode is going to be long, I'm going to give you an abridged version. So, let's start. Back in the 70s, the script editor, which is essentially the showrunner position as we know it now, was Douglas Adams, future author of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, which, by the way, is my favorite book series ever. During his final and Baker's penultimate season, Adams had a huge finale planned named Shada. The episode was ambitious and sure to become a classic. But there was a BBC strike, and so the episode was cancelled, and the finale became the rushed and much maligned The Horns of Nimon. And if you want to know more about that episode, watch Nash's Doctor Who Classic on it. Anyway, the footage they did get to shoot eventually saw the light of day during the Five Doctors, as a way for explaining why the Fourth Doctor wasn't present when Tom Baker declined to return. Shada would remain unseen in its intended form for 3 decades. In the intervening time, Douglas Adams reused some of the concepts from the episode in his other series, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, mainly the character of Professor Chronotis and St. Sed's College. After that, Tom Baker took part in a reconstruction which used the shot footage plus linking narration from Baker, similar to the way that reconstructions of missing first and second Doctor episodes had been done. The final attempt was done by Big Finish Productions in 2003, in which Lalla Ward and John Leeson returned as Romana and K9 respectively, and Paul McGann came in to play the Doctor, framing it around the 5 Doctors and having the 8th Doctor take the 4th Doctor's place. And that brings us back to the novelization, which is the only one of Douglas Adams' Doctor Who serials to have been allowed to be novelized, since Adams refused to let his episodes be novelized by anyone other than himself. Anyway, that brings us up to date with the backstory, so let's get to the review. The cover is kind of bland. I mean, that's okay since you're not buying it on the merit of the cover, you're buying it because it's A, Doctor Who, B, written by Douglas Adams, and C, the novelization of a previously untransmitted story featuring the longest running actor to have ever played the Doctor. As of the recording of this video. I'm still hoping Capaldi will stick around for a few more years. It's just a space background with the word Shada written in what looks like bits of the TARDIS in front of a planet or sun in eclipse with a purple glow around it. It has the classic Doctor Who logo in gold at the top, and it's the Lost Adventure from Douglas Adams, brought to us from Gareth Roberts, a writer for both Doctor Who and the Sarah Jane Adventures, and who wrote some of my favorite episodes of the modern series, Closing Time and The Caretaker. Anyway, let's get to the book. What? So this novel features the fourth Doctor, as I've already stated, who was played by Tom Baker, and honestly, while he's not my number one favorite actor to play the Doctor, he definitely gave one of the best and most alien portrayals to the Time Lord. And a lot of my favorite episodes are ones from his run, like The Keeper of Traken, The City of Death, then The Deadly Assassin. His companions in this are Romana 2, played by Lalla Ward, who was the second incarnation of the first and only to date Time Lord companion, and K9, the Tin Dog, played by John Leeson. The novel opens up with a man named Skagra doing something to a bunch of scientists at a think tank. Before he leaves, however, he steals their minds and leaves a distress call to keep people away before walking out into complete nothingness. Meanwhile on Earth, young Chris Parsons goes to borrow some books from Professor Chronotis, one of the oldest professors at St. Sed's College, in order to impress a girl he's interested in, Claire Kitely, and picks up a book with strange, not quite Celtic writing in it, and rushes off to meet Claire. However, he notices prior to leaving that Chronotis seems to have an old police box in the corner. I think it really ties the room together. The Doctor and Romana are punting on the River Cam, since when they arrived, Chronotis wasn't in his room, despite having sent the Doctor an urgent message. While punting, their thoughts are interrupted as Barusa attempts to abduct the two of them to play the game of Rassilon, but they are trapped in a time eddy and restored back to the timeline immediately, leaving them both confused, and they set off to meet with Chronotis. Skagra arrives on Earth and prepares to use a floating spear for something, and Chris notices that the strange book he picks up seems to be inducing vivid imagination. My guess is it must be a book written by Dr. Nigel Channing, though Chris doesn't mention seeing a purple dragon, so maybe not. The Doctor and Romana start walking to their destination, running into Wilkin, the porter at St. Sed's, who remembers all the times the Doctor has been there previously, and knows that he's looking for Professor Chronotis, since that's why he visited all the other times he was there. They arrive at Chronotis' room, and he brings them tea, as we are told that Chronotis is an old Time Lord who was presented with a choice to retire quietly to anywhere in the universe, and he chose St. Sed's College on Earth, and has been teaching there for 300 years. You'd think somebody would notice, but as he says, that's one of the delights of the older Cambridge colleges. Everyone is so discreet. The Doctor asks about the message, but Chronotis doesn't remember sending it, and so the Doctor questions that if it wasn't Chronotis, then who sent the message? Skagra confronts Wilkin, asking about Professor Chronotis, and is told that he is with the Doctor, causing Skagra to want to know more about the Doctor. Romana and the Doctor start thinking about who could have sent the message, and Chronotis realizes that he did in fact send it, but ages ago, and so had forgotten about it. When they ask why he sent it, he tells them it's about a book. A rather special book. In fact, it may be the most wholly remarkable, certainly the most successful book to ever come out of the Panopticon archive of Gallifrey. Chris decides to analyze the book and tries to cut a piece of the paper off, but he can't, and when he tries to scan it, the machine blows up. Skagra carjacks a guy and uses his spear to steal his mind in order to learn how to use the guy's car, and sets off to find the Doctor. All 'cause he can't drive stick. The Doctor and Romana set off searching Chronotis' shelves for the book, The Worshipful and Ancient Law of Gallifrey, which he took from Gallifrey when he retired, and Chris calls Claire to tell her about the book. Skagra returns to his ship and starts researching the Doctor, learning about him and planning his attack on the Doctor. Chris leaves Claire with the book and goes to ask Chronotis about it, and Chronotis reveals that Chris has been borrowing books earlier in the day, and so the doctor goes to find Chris. And on the way, they pass each other on the street, not knowing that they're looking for each other, and they go on their ways. Skagra gets into the campus, and Romana talks with Chronotis, wondering about the voices she heard when they were in the Time Eddy, and thinks about some famous Time Lord criminals, taking special mention of one named Sally Avon. Chronotis runs out of milk, and Romana runs into the TARDIS to get some, during which is when Skagra bursts in and attacks Chronotis, also seeking a specific book, presumably the same book that Chris took, and uses the spear on him like he did to that guy he carjacked. The Doctor meets up with Claire, hoping to get the book from her, and Romana returns from the TARDIS with K9 coming along, and they find Chronotis' body on the ground. Chris shows up, and Romana confronts him about the book, but she sends him into the TARDIS to get a medical kit, allowing us to have our requisite "it's bigger on the inside" moment. But on the plus side, Chris takes it rather well considering the crisis at hand. Chronotis' body is fine, but his mind has been rendered inert by the spear, and so Romana is going to use a special collar to keep his mind running while he recovers. Claire and the Doctor, meanwhile, discover that the book is minus 20,000 years old, and she lets the Doctor take it back to Chronotis. Skagra tries to absorb Chronotis' mind, but using some Time Lord mental discipline, the mind doesn't allow Skagra full access, only giving him some things and not what he wants, and Skagra fights to gain access. Romana, K9, and Chris listen to Chronotis' hearts, which are beating in Gallifreyan Morse code, saying, "Beware of the spear. Beware Skagra. Beware Shada."
Shada!
Not now, Tom. However, the code doesn't play very long as Chronotis' life functions cease shortly after. The Doctor rushes back to Chronotis' room, but Skagra catches up with him and attacks him with the spear, taking the book in the process. Romana and K9 show up in the TARDIS to rescue the Doctor, and they grab him and tell him that Chronotis is dead, and the Doctor tells them that he lost the book. Chris is meanwhile in Chronotis' rooms guarding it, as per the order of Romana after she took off in the TARDIS. Chris goes to close the Professor's eyelids, which are still wide open in fear, and when he does, Chronotis' body starts glowing and a golden aura surrounds it, and it disappears, right as the Doctor and Romana return. When Chris explains what happens, the Doctor deduces that Chronotis was on his last regeneration, and so he willed it to disappear so his body couldn't fall into the wrong hands. Chris tells the Doctor Chronotis' last words, and the part about the spear and Skagra makes sense, but the Doctor, Romana, and K9 are all at a loss about Shada. The Doctor realizes that he can't do this alone, and so goes to use the Hypercube to send a message to the Time Lords, requesting their help, which K9 is vehemently against, and so he destroys the cube. K9 explains that his function is to protect the Doctor and Romana, and his prognosticating has told him that the Time Lords wouldn't be the best for help, which Chris reinforces by saying that if the Time Lords are like the Doctor said they are, they might destroy the Earth to prevent the book from falling into Skagra's hands. Romana wants to send Chris home, but the Doctor wants to keep him around since he's proven his worth to him, and they set off in the TARDIS to find Skagra. Skagra tries to get his ship to read the book, but despite being able to translate every language, it can't translate Gallifreyan. I bet it can't do Bocce either. Chris walks around the TARDIS, finding the pool, and then decides to sleep, as Claire waits for him to return to the lab and also falls asleep. When she awakes and realizes that Chris is missing, she heads for St. Sedge to look for him. Chris wakes up to Romana and K9 having tracked Skagra's spear, as he used it on a fisherman to extract information from it. And Claire sneaks past Wilkin to get into Chronotis' room. She finds the place looking ransacked, and so goes to ask Wilkin for help, but he's oblivious to the strange goings-on involving the Doctor. Wilkin is the type of guy to tell a kid in Power Rangers that there's no such thing as monsters. The TARDIS team finds Skagra's ship, although they don't really, cause it's invisible. Wait a minute, that's not Skagra's ship, that's the HMS Bounty from Star Trek IV. They walk up the invisible stairs and knock on the door, causing Romana, Chris, and K9 to be transported to a small white room, and the Doctor to be led into an airlock. Skagra confronts the Doctor and requests that he reads the worshipful and ancient law of Gallifrey to him, but the Doctor refuses. So Skagra uses the spear on him again, this time getting to attack him fully and steals his mind.
His brain is gone.
Chris, Romana, and K9 bide their time in the White Room, and K9 starts broadcasting the signal from the sphere, revealing to the three that the Doctor's voice is among them. Claire waits in Chronotis' room, waiting for Wilkin, and gets frustrated and starts snooping around, finding various things like a Bonnie Tyler cassette from the future, and a cabinet that has a false back and locates a console, which she activates, causing the room to shake, and when Wilkin finally shows up and opens the door, the room is missing. Skagra tries to find the information about the language the book is written in from the Doctor's mind, but decides that he's going to steal the TARDIS because it might require Time Lord tech to extract. He leaves to go do that, and as he leaves, the Doctor wakes up. Romana gets angry about the Doctor's death and shouts about how she wants to get out of the room, and she suddenly disappears. Chris and K9 try to figure out what happened, and Romana recovers from the transposition, finding that Skagra brought her out because he needs a hostage to take onto the TARDIS with him, and they set off for his command station, and then to Shada. The Doctor wakes up, recovering from the spear attack, and asks the computer what happened, and she tells him that Skagra left. The computer refuses to comply with his request to where his friends are, since he is an enemy to Skagra, and so the Doctor convinces the computer that he's dead. This allows him to get his friends released, but unfortunately the computer decides that if he is dead, he doesn't need air and shuts off the oxygen generator.
There is logic in what he says.
Chris and K9 escape from the White Room and go to the room where the Doctor is, and the oxygen is turned back on for Chris, meaning the Doctor, while officially dead, can remain unofficially alive. Romana is introduced to the Krog, which are Skagra's henchmen, and are magma creatures that are basically manufacturable, and so he has a bunch of them on his command base. The Doctor, Chris, and K9 try to figure out how to track Skagra, and the Doctor realizes that to do that, they need to work backwards, and uses the ship's blind logic to go where Skagra was before he landed on Earth. The ship says that it doesn't conflict with his orders, and so complies with the request. However, it also starts up the Krog-making machine. Chris wakes up in Chronotis' room and looks around, finding that she is sharing the room with a ghost, who walks to the control panel and turns a knob, reverting him to a corporeal being who introduces himself as Professor Chronotis. The ship tells the Doctor that it'll take 3 months to get to Skagra's last destination, and so he decides to modify the ship's warp engines to function similar to a TARDIS, allowing near-instantaneous travel. Upon doing that, the Doctor learns that Skagra set the ship to self-destruct after a few hours, and the Doctor defuses it, but as they sigh in relief at one crisis, a Krog climbs out of its tank. Romana talks with Skagra, who explains that his world sucked because everyone was different than him and didn't like history, blah blah blah. Skagra's really a whiner. He's like Kylo Ren, except Kylo Ren's whining was funny to listen to. Skagra explains how he got to this point, explaining that he discovered information, built a station, and he had almost everything save for the book, which he knew wasn't on Gallifrey, and so tortured a sister of Karn to get the information of where it is, which led him to Chronotis. Romana uses this opportunity to try to fight back, but the Krog stop her, and Skagra puts her under guard. The Doctor lands the ship and the Krogs attack, while Skagra whines about how his plan is failing because the code the book is written in is untranslatable. When he realizes that it's because it's Time Lord, and so he has to implement time into the equation. The ship takes a long time to dock, giving the Krogs a good chance to break into the bridge, and Chris and the Doctor escape after the Doctor combines K9 to the ship's power source so he can use his laser to hold back the Krogs. Skagra figures out the code and prepares to use the book to take the TARDIS to Shada. The Doctor and Chris look around the think tank, which is wrecked, and all the scientists' minds have been stolen by Skagra. Claire and Chronotis talk, as she is incredulous to the story that they're in a Type 12 TARDIS in the vortex, which she doesn't believe until Chronotis opens the curtains to reveal the time vortex. Romana and Skagra walk on to Shada, which is an ancient Time Lord prison which was wiped from the collective minds of Gallifrey, so no one could ever find it, and is where the evil Sally Avon was sent to be imprisoned. Chronotis tries to explain Shada to Claire, and K9 realizes that the Krogs are absorbing his laser's energy. The Doctor tries to fix one of the scientists' minds using Chris's mind, and gets part of some coordinates from him, before he dies, and a Krag bursts in, and the Doctor warns the Krog that if he fires his weapon, the entire station will be destroyed. Naturally, the Crag fires, and the Doctor gathers up Chris and K9 and prepares to hightail it out of there, starting the ship to go to the coordinates given by the scientist. Chronotis tries to get himself and Claire out of temporal orbit, but it's easier said than done, which means they have to do some fixing of the TARDIS. The Doctor and company meets back up with Romana at Skagra's command ship, and they try to return to the TARDIS. The Doctor confronts Skagra, and they get to bantering, and the Doctor, Chris, and K9 have to abandon Romana again so they can run from the Krogs. Skagra decides to finally head for Shada, and Chronotis and Claire show up to save the Doctor and company from certain death. Chris and Claire reunite and start bickering, and the Doctor and Chronotis start to use his TARDIS to follow the Doctors. Skagra lands on Shada and forces Romana to use her Time Lord bioprint to unlock doors, and he orders her to find Sally Avon, and they go to his chamber and unlock the door. The Doctor and Chronotis land and walk into Shada, following Skagra as Skagra opens up Sally Avon's cryogenic pod as Romana watches in horror. Chris and Claire make up and start talking about Chronotis and how odd it is that Claire picked up all the Time Lord stuff rather quickly, leading Chris to put something together in his head, and he rushes after the Doctor and leaves Claire and Chronotis' TARDIS. Sally Avon's pod opens and it's empty, save for a note reading in a rough translation, "Ha ha ha, up yours, love Sally Avon." So I guess Sally Avon is kinda like Rick Sanchez. That would make so much sense. Anyway, Skagra falls to his knees in sorrow at his failure as the Doctor and Chronotis show up, and the Doctor decides that they'll get Skagra a therapist, return the prison to how it was when they showed up, and let the place stay a secret, as was Sally Avon's intention. See, he was a telepathic criminal, and he wiped Shada and himself from memory in order to hide his escape. Chris shows up and, out of breath, shouts that Sally Avon is there after all. And Sally Avon is none other than the Doctor! Nah, I'm just screwing with you, it's Chronotis. Skagra uses the spear on Chronotis, going for a full extraction, and takes over Chronotis, K9, and Chris, preparing to kill the Doctor and Romana. They fall over as Claire brings the Type 12 around to pick them up, and the Doctor tells them that he knew that Chronotis was Sally Avon from the moment he found out that Chronotis had a TARDIS. They try to devise a plan to stop Skagra, and Romana reminds the Doctor that a copy of his mind is in the spear, causing the Doctor to think of an amazing plan. He takes Chronotis, or rather Sally Avon's TARDIS, into the vortex and pulls it up next to his own TARDIS, using an extended force field to cross over to his. However, there's an explosion, and it seems that the Doctor is going to fly out into the vortex. Maybe he'd see Salamander when he flew off. But he lands in his TARDIS, and he begins to build something in the storeroom. Skagra plans his takeover of the universe using an army of spears, and his universal mind, and the Doctor finishes his helmet invention and rushes out to confront Skagra. With that helmet, he knows that Skagra came from a long distance and wants the Doctor to buy a subscription to the Saturday Evening Post. Skagra sends his Krogs and his mind slaves after the Doctor, who tries to break at least K9 out of Skagra's spell, and breaks them all out before Skagra brings them back into it, and it becomes a back and forth of mind control and freedom between the two of them. Claire and Romana sneak out of the TARDIS to set Skagra's ship to explode, but they don't need to, since the ship was happy to do it for them, as the ship is a friend of the Doctor's now. Sally Avon helps the Doctor take over Skagra's mind for a moment, allowing Skagra to touch the book with bare skin, meaning he gets the flash of imagination, and he sees the future, which is nothing but the Doctor all the time. Oh no! His future is being trapped inside of Tumblr! Or Tumblr like 3 years ago, since everyone seems to hate Doctor Who now. Skagra runs away, and the Doctor, K9, and Romana set off to restore Shada, and Claire takes Chris and Chronotis in his TARDIS to follow them. The Doctor uses the TARDIS's viewer to show Romana that Skagra is imprisoned in his own ship, under Doctor's orders, being forced to watch holo recordings of every single one of the Doctor's adventures, starting out with a policeman in a junkyard. After fixing everything, the Doctor and friends relax on an alien beach, and the Doctor explains how he fixed everything, restoring everyone's minds and giving all the ones with destroyed bodies new ones from a level 11 planet. The Doctor explains Sallyhaven's plot and how he got imprisoned and how he escaped, leading to Sallyhaven blocking himself from his own mind to become Chronotis. Romana explains what they had to do next, namely tell the Time Lords what happened, leaving out anything involving Sallyhaven and Chronotis, and return the book to Gallifrey. Chronotis decides to go back to Cambridge, bringing Chris and Claire with him, who finally profess their love for each other as the Doctor, Romana, and K9 return to their adventures, setting off on their adventures, but not before Wilkins shows up at Chronotis' room with a policeman shocked to find it returned, and the cop is shocked to find a police box in there, arresting Chronotis, Chris, Claire, and Wilkins as the Doctor, Romana, and K9 return to the TARDIS, setting the randomizer to bring them on another crazy adventure. And that was Shada. Was it good? Yes, it is my favorite incarnation of the story, and as much as I like Paul McGann, this story was written for Tom Baker, and even McGann can't do it as much justice as this book can, nailing down all of Tom Baker's quirks. The reconstruction is fine, but this is by far the best version out there. It's not all that expensive, and if you like Doctor Who, especially Tom Baker's era, or Douglas Adams in general, I definitely recommend this. It is a phenomenal read, and one of the only Doctor Who novelizations that I'd put into my top 10 favorite books of all time. It makes me wish that this episode had been finished, because this might have been the single greatest episode of Doctor Who of all time, if it had. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of The Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button, and if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. It's been a great 4 years, and I can't wait to see what year 5 of The Literary Lair will bring. See you next time.